Right, good morning. We're just waiting for a few more people to join us, and we will start the webinar in a couple of minutes. Okay, good morning or afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Ute Collier. I'm the Acting Director of the Knowledge Policy and Finance Center at IRENA, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this IRENA Policy Talks webinar. So the topic of today is policies for advancing the renewables-based electrification of transport. This is our first report where we're actually focusing on policies in the transport sector. You may be aware the energy transition, of course, has to not just focus on the power sector, but also the end-use sectors. And transport is one that's been particularly tricky, where we have a relatively low penetration of renewables, where we have still mostly fossil fuels, and it's clearly a very important sector to focus on. So at IRENA, we've done work, of course, on the technology and innovation aspects of transport. We've included transport in our World Energy Transition Outlook in the scenarios, but today we want to specifically focus on the road transport aspects, on the role electrification can play to help us reduce emissions. So we have just launched a report on that topic, and I'm assured it's on our website. What we're going to do today is, first of all, give you a scene-setting presentation on the report, which will be done by my colleague Jinlei Fang, who's the main person behind the report. And then we have a panel discussion with 4 panelists where we explore some of the topics in more detail. And I will introduce the panelists later on. So we're going to start with the scene-setting presentation. Jinlei, did you want me to do the poll now? First, we have a couple of polls for you to answer as well. Okay, here we go.
Hello, Ute.
Yes.
So I suggest maybe I quickly go through the slides and then the poll questions to get some views.
That sounds good. But so for all the audience to be aware, of course, we will have some opportunities for Q&As. So please, as you listen to either the presentation or the panelists, you can put your questions into the Q&A bit of the Zoom screen. So at the bottom, please Q&As rather than chat. Thank you. And I'll pass over to Jinlei.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ute. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. My name is Jinlei Feng. I'm a program officer at the International Renewable Energy Agency based in Abu Dhabi. So today I would like very briefly to share some findings based on our newly launched report, the policies for advancing the renewables-based electrification of road transport. This report aims to present some policies for promoting the electrification of light-duty vehicles, 2-, 3-wheelers, buses, and trucks. So as well as how to utilizing renewable electricity for road transport. So it will analyze the market stages and also the barriers, and then propose policies, measures supported by examples from different countries. So first is, if we look at the current stages, the deployment of EVs over the last decade has continued to increase. The global EV sales actually increased from less than 5% just 2019 to like last year almost 20%. If you look at the numbers, 5 years ago, the total fleet on the road globally was just 10 million. But last year, the newly added EVs in a single year was over 70 million. So the increase has been gradually more promising. But if you look at the overall progress of the transition, is still insufficient compared to the required level. Because according to IRENA, our World Energy Transitions Outlook, under the 1.5 scenario, by 2050, the EVs would need to account over 90% of the total stock globally of the cars. But the current share of the EVs in the total fleet is just less than 5%. We need to increase from less than 5% to 90% is really some additional efforts are needed. And if we look at the right side of the figure, different markets, we can see the development is unbalanced. You can see only China, like last year, only China, Sweden, Norway. We can see the market penetration, the EV share in total vehicle sales. It's more than or around 50%. But if you look at the other large market like India, Japan, Brazil, still less than 10%. But we also see the progressing and development. Outside of this group of selected countries, in most of other markets, especially developing markets, the progress has been very slow. And the charging infrastructure shows a similar trends. And although we see that many technologies already exist, but they still face very strong barriers in different aspects. The most dominant I would highlight are the upfront cost of the electric options compared to the internal combustion engine vehicles, particularly for the buses and the trucks. Because if you look at the many markets, the electric buses and the trucks are still cost twice or even 4 times the purchase cost of the diesel-based counterparts. Even though we say, if we consider the low operation cost, the total cost of ownership has been more attractive for most of the vehicles. But in the context that owners or buyers have limited financing opportunity, the upfront cost can be a big barrier. And also another barrier is charging infrastructure. If they cannot meet the EV owners' needs in a convenient way, it becomes a big barrier for the deployment. And another barrier I would highlight is inconsistent of the policy signals, especially it became more prominent recently in the current situation. Some of the policies actually can help to drive the transition in all the vehicle types and also different context. We call it cross-cutting the policies and the measures. Left side, we can see that some of the summarized framework and the measures for this category. These include the policies for improving the efficiency of the vehicle and also transport activities. And another key measures is promoting the sustainable urban mobility. and also the key measures to enable the EV market in the context where the initial deployment has been struggling. So I would like to highlight only several points. The first is cities actually plays a very unique role in promoting EVs. So improved urban planning, or we say land use policy, the mixed use development or transit-oriented development, they can all help to reduce the urban transport needs and accelerate the more active and low carbon mobility options. And also efficiency, I would highlight that replacing the internal combustion engine traditional oil fossil fuel-based cars with EVs itself can largely improve efficiency, because we know that EV, the electric drivetrain, have much higher energy conversion efficiency compared to the fossil fuel-based cars. It can be more like 4 times more energy efficiency, which means even we see that the energy consumption of EVs in global total energy consumption of the road transport is just less than 1%. But the less than 1% electricity consumption, the EVs contribute a large share of the total driving distance of the road transport. This means EVs can consume significantly less energy to meet the same global transport needs. And the last point on this I would highlight is the electrification process should be just and inclusive. This means not only considering the vulnerable formal or informal workers, but also we need to consider the impacts of the transition on developing and emerging markets, such as how to offer more affordability options, or how to reduce the possible impacts if the world would like to increase the activity on getting the critical materials for the EVs. I would like to very briefly to some different types of vehicles, highlight the policies and measures we have identified. Like light-duty vehicles, the cars are responsible for majority of the activity, and they are commercial, available, and affordable in most markets, we say. Like in China, Germany, and US, they can save money after driving the EVs for 7 or 5 or even less years. It become more cost effective compared to the fossil fuel-based cars. But the availability of public charging is a major concern. It will need more investment and integrated planning at the national or regional level. And also another concern has been increasing is the demand for the materials. So in that case, we need a circular economy framework to be included into the policy to address this issue. For the 2 and 3-wheelers, it offers very affordable option in the developing context, because especially like if we look at some of the Southeast Asia countries, the 2, 3-wheelers even consume more petrol fuels than the cars. So if you look at China, India, Indonesia, or Southeast Asia countries, they are among the major markets who have a large number of the 2, 3-wheelers. But in the case that in the developing markets, if we look at some owners or buyers have very limited financial resources, the cost still can be a barrier. And address this issue, actually, among all the measures, we can also try to address the issue through the adoption of the innovative business model, which means that leasing the electrical wheeler or leasing the battery as a service, especially there's a case when the electric 2, 3-wheelers for the last mile delivery in the urban area, like food delivery. The battery swapping network actually can address the concerned on the driving range, but also tap the potential for smart charging. And another big part is bus, because bus is a key solution for the shifting private driving to public transport. And it's electric bus is the most promising technology, but it likely already 2 or 3 times higher the front cost. And a big opportunity we find from a lot of different regional example is to combine the development of public transit system like a bus rapid transit system together with the deployment of electric vehicle can be a very promising option. And also they can utilize the potential financing opportunity from multilateral development institutes to support such projects. We have seen many examples in like Colombia, India, Egypt, and also other Southeast Asia countries. So for the trucks, actually is least developed type compared to other vehicle types. I mean the electrification options. The main barrier actually is one of that is technological constraints. So in the near term, we see that the government and industry should increase the support for technology innovation and also incentives to bridge the cost gap and the support for charging corridors. So a key part for IRENA we would like to see is how to utilize the renewables for the road transport. We see that because under the global pledge of tripling renewable power electricity by 2030, electrification of road transport must be aligned. So now we have seen there are 2 options in the different countries. The first, we can combine on-site solar PV generation with EV home charger or charging stations. We can see many examples in Europe, in China, in US, and also India. And also another option is to go through the smart charging. So there are a lot of smart charging options, and to not only just utilize renewable, but also the increase the share of renewables in the power grid. So some highlighted policies for smart charging. They can reduce the bills for EV owners and also provide a lot of benefits to the overall power system. But realizing these benefits requires the really regulation and updates and also actions from the government, from power market regulator to enable the participants of the stakeholders, but also the international efforts to improve the standardization of the charging and the protocol communication protocol. So this is to summarize that actually we see that road transport electrification is important for the energy transition. Current deployment is developing, but not enough, need to be accelerated. So policies and measures are needed, and there are a lot of best practice from different countries, different contexts. What we need more is more forward-looking the actions and the ambition from the industry, from the countries, and together with the international collaboration. At the end, I would like to thank all the colleagues who helped deliver the report, including IRENA colleague Abdullah Fahad. And we also have the external experts, Jacob Tatter and Vincent Benezak, and also 2 former Korea intern, Ji-Hye Guan and Han-Bit Lee. Thank you very much. I will stop here.
Thank you, Jin-Lei. Let's do the poll then. Are we ready? So we're just trying to gauge the audience's views and understanding on some of the topics. So the first question is, in your view, what are the 3 major concerns that make you or it could be people, you know, if you've bought your own EV already. So what are the concerns people have that stops them from switching from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles? So there's some options: EVs priced too high, drive range not enough, charging is not convenient, concerns about safety, batteries. Some people seem to think EVs don't reduce emissions in real life. EV options in the vehicle market are much less than ICE cars. Concerns about battery degradation. I guess there can be, I can think of at least one additional one, but please pick from those. So if you now go and click on your preferred answer, it can be several, it's a multiple choice thing. Please go ahead and we'll wait. Shall we go for the answers, Jinlei? All right. So EV price is too high is just about, well, can't really call it the winner. I mean, it is true that in many cases, EVs are still have a higher price than the equivalent ICE or hybrid vehicle, although those prices have been coming down a lot. There are some concerns about charging not being convenient, and I presume that's especially for people living in cities, and a lot can still be done on infrastructure. That's 66%. And then there's some concern about battery degradation. At least the audience seem to be convinced about the EV's ability to reduce emissions. So that's good, apart from maybe one person who's still skeptical. Yeah. Okay, concern about safety of batteries. There are some people there. All right, so maybe some of these points will also be picked up when we speak to our panelists. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our 4 panelists, who are all experts in this area. So we have Gongomtua Sitangang, who's the Southeast Asia Director from the Institute for Transport and Development Policy. Pierpaolo Cazzola, the Director of European Transport and Energy Research Center. Sky Liu, International Cooperation Director, the China Society of Automotive Engineers. And Sunita Anup, who's a researcher at the International Council on Clean Transportation. So welcome all, we're very pleased to have you with us. And we are now going to have a round where I ask a question to each of you, and then we have a second round of questions. In the meantime, just to remind the audience, please get ready to put in your questions into the Q&A box. You can ask questions to any of the panelists, but also more general questions, which we can then pick up and see who would like to answer it. So let me start with Sky. China, of course, we hear a lot about EVs in China and how fast it's been growing. So based on China's experience, what do you consider the 2 or 3 most effective policies or measures that the country has adopted for promoting EVs and charging infrastructure? And looking at the future, to continue scaling up deployment, say for the next 2 decades, are there any specific policies that are needed to continue this phenomenal growth, or do you feel we're at the stage now where maybe the market can deliver? So Sky, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Wu-Tan, and hello everyone. For this question, I want to share I think 3 measures that I think is interesting to you today. The first measure is about the continuous and stable strategy planning to promote the technology advance of EVs. from beginning from 2001, China put forward the so-called 3 pillars and the 3 horizons RD layout, which include pure EVs, FC EV, and PHEV. That's 3 pillars. And the batteries, the powertrains, and the control unit are the 3 horizons. So these 3P and 3H served as the technology roadmap for the whole country to guidance the stakeholders to focus on these RD issues. And the China has been undertaking these 3P and 3H during continuously 5-year plans, which is 25 years continuous effort. And the second matter I want to share is about the top level working mechanism. Because considering the EVs, the connection of automobile, energy, utility, and infrastructure, etc. So it is under different government agencies' duty domain. So China created the inter-ministries joint meeting mechanism in 2013. So it's included 18 ministries and agencies related to the EVs. So allowing them to meet regularly to coordinate the problems we are facing when developing the industry. And the third matter I want to share is about the widespread pilot application. Beginning in 2009, China launched the so-called 10 cities and 1,000 EVs pilot project. It promoted the usage of EVs in 10 selected cities, mostly in public sectors, about including the public buses, taxis, government vehicles, etc., for demonstration. And we also choose the 2008 Beijing Olympic Games and 2010 Shanghai World Expo as the pilot opportunities. Each of these has around 1,000 EVs, mostly commercial vehicles, to demonstrate. So all of these pilot projects not only tested the availability of EVs, but also it aroused the public awareness and the interest to the whole society. Yeah, this is the 3 matters I want to share. And for the second one, I think in the future, I believe the scaling up EVs in China will be promoted by the market force instead of policies. Because as you may have seen, China's EV penetration rate in for the couple years, China's EV sales penetration rate has reached 5% in 2020, and from that year, the penetration rate has been rushing up to 30% in 2021 and 25% in 2022, and last year is nearly 50%. So I think in the market application science, they have a word that is turning corner. They believe that 5% penetration rate is means the new product can from the juvenile situation to mature, and it can start to have the ability to be sustainable by itself, and the market will grow as long as there are good products be on the market continuously. So, in these years, the supporting policies for adopting EVs has been phasing out gradually, but we can also see the penetration rate is still growing. Yeah, that's it.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Sky. And because just going back to the poll where there seems to be still quite a big concern about EVs being too expensive in comparison to internal combustion engine cars. In China, is there now a good enough selection with lower priced EVs as well?
Yes, I think in China the EV's price is at the same level of ICE cars beginning from 2 years ago. So, you know, from maybe 10 years or 8 years ago, the EV is still expensive in China. But from all of these 10 years development and, you know, all the supply chain development and the technology advance, we already have the vehicles, the EVs, at the same price as the ICE cars, or even lower than ICE cars. And also it's because the batteries price is coming down, the batteries cost, because of the, you know, the upper stream supplies, such as the cores, they are coming down. So you know, we have better price right now.
Great. Okay, thank you. Let me come to Sunita, and let's talk about 2- and 3-wheelers, which I mean, South Asia is one of the major markets for them. In your view, how can we incentivize the electrification of 2- or 3-wheelers in the South Asian context? What might be the key drivers and also benefits for people in that region to change their normal petrol-based motorcycles to electric ones?
Yeah, thank you for the question. You've rightly pointed out about this segment in South Asia because it's one of the largest market for 2- and 3-wheelers, which means that there is a wonderful opportunity for making an impactful transformation. And from our research in ICCT, we find that electrification of this segment offers a lot of benefits for this region, primarily because it has a smaller battery, and hence it can be considered as an easier segment to electrify. And of course, the total cost of ownership is also seen lower, and hence it is important to have this segment. So these vehicles, as I see, it's typically used intensively by lower and middle income households, or in other words, the informal sector workers. So when we talk about the incentives, a targeted support would be beneficial to have like high returns in terms of socioeconomic factors and at the same time environmental returns. And I think for the incentivizing this transition, I can see there are 3 important levers. Number one, as mentioned in the report, upfront cost reduction, because this consumer segment is highly cost sensitive. Hence, direct purchase subsidies or reduced tax, and in fact, financial instruments should be targeted. And for example, like credit guarantees, they can significantly ease the shift, in my opinion. Number two, of course, it is the robust charging. And this segment has a benefit that it can be home charged because of this small battery. But we can also see that this is well suited for battery swapping due to its size and urban usage pattern. So, for example, if we can have like a partnerships, both public and private, to scale up this networks of charging, both battery swapping and public charging, they can fundamentally increase the confidence, and it is reducing the downtime. So, and the last point I would say it would be like, fleet prioritization, because commercial use has a lot of application in the urban areas, and shared mobility, or what we say as the last mile delivery. And these fleets, they have great visibility. So mandates like city level zero emission zones or low emission zones, and even the preferential permit for electric 3-wheelers, they can catalyze this transition. So in other words, if we can have like a crafted ecosystem approach with a combination of targeted incentives, infrastructure, regulatory certainty, and at the same time, local value chain development, they can definitely accelerate the electrification of 2 and 3 wheelers in South Asia.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to Gonggong Tua next, and let's talk about public transport. I mean, obviously, you know, we all think public transport is great in terms of emissions, but certainly a lot better than individual transport. But the reality in many cities is that you still have lots of inefficient buses spewing out diesel fumes, adding to local air pollution as well. So it's not just a climate change issue. So if we think about electrification in the public transport system, in your view, what are the best policies and tools that can help promote it? And can you tell us about any good examples in the Southeast Asia region? I mean, one of the things is obviously public funding from local governments, but how can we also attract more investments into that sector? Over to you.
Yes, thank you, Ute. Yeah, so I was very intrigued in the presentations that was delivered by Jinlei, especially when he mentioned about the framework of avoid, shift, and improve, because that's exactly what we as an ITDP have been doing actually. So, and I want to expand based on that framework. So from ITDP perspective, from our perspective, we have the same or similar concept on what we call compact city electrified. So there are two aspects on that, right? So compact city meaning that meaning the avoid and shift, where we want people to have a mixed use land use within that city, so that it can reduce the needs to travel, the needs for mobility, thereby reducing the emissions from the transport. And and also the shift aspect on it, where we want people, if they still need to use their vehicle, we want them to shift to public transport. And then there is the second aspect, electrified. So all vehicles that exist within that city should be electrified. So based on our research, this concept, compact city electrified, is the only, is the way where we can achieve the 1.5 scenario. So that's there. And why we should electrify public transport? Well, exactly, you have mentioned this, okay. One, because of it's relatively easy to transition, because it has the same routes and pattern every day. So it's easy to predict, and it's easy to provide the infrastructures. We know the stations, we know the depots, we know the routes. So we know the types of buses that we want to serve those routes. And the second reason is because, yes, the high mileage. So for example, in Jakarta, every day one buses will run for at least 200 kilometers per day. So if we electrify these buses, these diesel buses, we can have a significant impact to the GHG reductions. And the third reason why we want to prioritize public buses is because this is the momentum as well, to answer your question. This is the electrifications of buses is the momentum to reform our public transport system. Because in Southeast Asia, and also especially in Indonesia, our public transport system is in majority is dominated by informal public transit system, where it is operated by private. There is no service level. The safety is quite poor. The infrastructure is also below standard. So this electrification agenda, this electrification issue, we want this as a momentum to also reform the public transport system. So for example, on what we are currently doing in 3 cities in Indonesia, Surabaya, Surakarta, and Pekanbaru, we are helping the city government to electrify their public transport system. However, before we are talking about electrifications, we need to address the public transport system itself first, because electric buses, hydrogen, and everything else is just the technology, right? We need to have the system in place yet, so that when we electrify, when we use electric buses, there are people using it. So there is impact. There are impacts of people using it. So for the public transport system, well, we all know that public transport is losing business. So certainly it needs public funding. However, the electrifications could utilize the participations from the private or international support. So for example, in the case of Jakarta, before they have these regulations or the policy of electrifications in Jakarta, there were no demand, there were no interest from the international community or international funder to come into this issue. So in 2022, we helped the government of Jakarta to issue policies, meaning they have the target to electrify its public buses. 100% of its public buses are electric buses by 2030. And since the issuance of that policy or that commitment, then there are many international support coming in, because the key to that is that the market certainty. So once you have market certainty in the form of regulations and policy, then it will give confidence to private sector, to international community to provide the supports, right? So that's the key, the key lessons learned from our public buses electrifications. And I'm sure it also the case for private vehicles, the market certainty. And the other good example is what I've learned is in Thailand. So they already have like more than 2,000 buses. And the same, what I've learned is that before they have these thousands of electric buses on the road, they first issue national policy. They issue a target to give confidence to all of the stakeholders that yes, the government has the commitment to electrify its buses by certain year, then it will provide confidence to all the stakeholders. And now have this agreement, carbon agreement with Switzerland, where they have this carbon trading, and then from that carbon trading, they can purchase the thousands of electric buses. I'll stop there, Ute.
Great, thank you. And thanks for raising the issue of targets. I mean, of course, they're no panacea, but at IRENA, we always stress how important it is to set ambitious targets, because we've seen the success in the power sector with targets. And targets, of course, have to be, you have to have a bit of a strategy for implementation, but the confidence for investors is important. And of course, that kind of, Sky was also telling us about the long-term commitment and the consecutive 5-year plans in China being so important. I think it's that consistency which is clearly key. All right, let me then come to Pier Paolo and a different aspect. It's important to think about, okay, we want to, of course, promote these technologies as part of the energy transition and to reduce emissions, but they also provide many opportunities, industrial development opportunities. And that's certainly a potential benefits in the EV sector. So Pier Paolo, in your view, how can developing countries promote local EV supply chains? I think there was also a question about, China specifically now dominating global supply chains, but let's think about developing countries, how they can benefit from these developments and what policies and measures are needed to ensure that they can have a role in it and that they don't just end up importing everything.
So yes, thanks, Ute. I agree, I must say, on the importance of diversifying supply chains, not because there's an issue specific with a single country, but because dependence on a single country is generally worse than multiple actors and countries having stakes in an important value chain like the one we're talking about. So in that respect, I think it's important also for emerging economies to look for opportunities and try to seize them. And so the ways to do that is well, I would say maybe first is to create local demand. You generally tend to have opportunities to create clusters, industrial clusters also if you have local demand. If you don't have local demand, it's very difficult. Everything has to be geared towards export. Now, to stimulate local demand in emerging economies, you need to look at cases which have the best economics. Generally, in the case of EVs, this is the case for vehicles that have high utilization profiles, because that's what allows to seize the opportunities from lower operational costs of EVs. So you need to stimulate, for example, a transition in the bus sector, in taxis, in vehicles that have heavy use. That also can help build infrastructure, which is another requirement to enable growth of local demand in a way that is cost effective. Because if you have highly utilized vehicles and you also build clustered like areas where you begin to charge them, then those chargers can become available for other purposes and then can build additional demand. Then there are other policies beyond this, which I think enter into the space of industrial policy. It could be things like conditional requirements for the development of joint ventures for market access. Then, of course, this depends on how big is the region and how strong is the leverage that region can have to attract investments. Could be also to add conditionalities on access to public funding. So basically, for example, EV purchase incentives or public procurement money can be paired with environment-related clauses, which are non-discriminatory, but could be convenient for countries that have, for example, low emission grids. I'm thinking of some countries in Latin America, for example. And because it could give them a competitive advantage based on their favorable environmental profile. And then there are other tools, fiscal tools that help favoring investments for mineral processing or for other parts of the value chain. There are challenges in this space because there's also there are international trade rules, the WTO. So any kind of action that needs to be taken there needs to be compliant with the rules of international trade. But yeah, if you talk about industrial development and seizing opportunities for industrial development, I think inevitably you end up into this kind of area. Beyond these, some countries have also used. There are countries, for example, that are mineral rich, and they have state-owned enterprises for mineral extraction. They use contractual clauses to try to pull towards their economy greater parts of the EV value chain. Other countries have used higher taxation on exports for primary materials. So there's a range of options. Or India uses production-linked incentives tied to volume. They can be tied to volume, employment, technology transfer. So there's different aspects. There are different tools. But there's a need to essentially leverage best cases, like most cost-effective cases, because of capital availability constraints. And there is a need to make sure that whatever is the choice, this is coherent with the international trade framework, so WTO rules.
Sorry. Thank you, Pierpaolo. Sky, can I just hear your thoughts from the Chinese perspective? Obviously, your automotive industry is interested in exporting everywhere, but I presume you are also investing in local supply chains in different countries, right?
Sorry, you mean Chinese company to invest the supply chain in other countries?
Yes, and manufacturing in other countries. This has, of course, happened, for example, in the PV sector, where Chinese companies have invested in many other countries, especially in South Asia.
Yes, I think not only the car companies, they have some factories in Southeast Asia and in Europe, but also the batteries companies, they also set up several factories in Europe, like Hungary, in Spain, in Finland, I think. Yeah, there are a couple of them. So they are, because they are also thinking about diversify their manufacturing capacity across the world to compensate the the possible risk of the concentration.
Okay, thank you. That effectively, we've effectively answered one of the questions from the audience. Okay, let me do a second round with you then. And that's okay. We've heard lots of positive developments in terms of, we know there is a lot of growth, but the reality is that we are also seeing some rollbacks in various countries, and rollbacks in terms of certainly financial support subsidies where they are still needed, or targets, or regulations which were designed to improve vehicle efficiency and accelerate electrification. And not just picking on the United States, also in Europe and elsewhere. Is there a way to design policies to prevent these kind of rollbacks and delays? I mean, obviously, every time you have a new government, there is always a risk of this kind of thing happening. But can you think of any ways to ensure this continuity, which we've seen, say, for example, in China? And what kind of international actions or efforts do you think can help this? Who wants to start? Sunita, do you want to go maybe from your perspective?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ute, because this is very important and very timely. As we see, the rollback that you have mentioned can be a result of probably lobbying pressure or some kind of disruption, and ultimately we are seeing a delay in the critical climate policies in action. So that is very important to avoid these setbacks, because we need to have that momentum, so that we need policies which are not just technically sound, but also they are supported enough and resilient enough. So I think from our work in ICCT across geography, we could highlight some of the key principles, which could be nothing but these resilient policy designs. And number one, I can see it is through legislative anchoring, which means that whatever ambition which we have for the vehicle efficiency or electrification goals in legislation, it should be tightly bound, rather than just relying on the automatic market traction, because these will really help to shield the political shift, as you mentioned. For example, some of the progressive nations have got legal timelines, which is ultimately giving a kind of certainty for the investment for both the automakers as well as the suppliers. So that is very important to have that anchoring. Second, I think would be some kind of coalition, which will help a kind of durability, which is a combination of industry, civil society, or even consumer group. For example, in India, we have seen that there are a lot of subnational or state EV state level policies that we may name it, it is primarily a strong stakeholder buy-in that we are seeing, and they are, largely consistent with the political transition. So that's a helpful to have that coalition. Number three, I think it would be like, of course, the stringent standards with some kind of support mechanisms, because without the enablers, which the other speakers have already mentioned enough, like the subsidies and also support in terms of like R&D and at the same time, the investment in infrastructure, so that there is a feasibility in compliance, and at the same time it's attractive economically. So that support is very important. And at the same time, we should also see the angle of monitoring in terms of like transparency, where we are seeing that there is a transparency in reporting systems for everything related to emissions, vehicle performance, or even a kind of dashboard for the policy progress, because that is ultimately maintaining the public trust, or we are seeing there is an accountability. So that element is also important. Yeah. And the second question that you have asked was, the international front, how is it being tackled? Because I think this is a very important stage where we have like a lot of experts from international organizations. So I can name like there are several promising avenues where in fact the global platforms like IRENA and the International ZEV Alliance, or the Zero Emission Vehicle Alliance, where ICCT serves as a secretariat. That's it's a kind of convening meeting, and it's a good platform for conducting research and collaboration. Similarly, we have the A2C, or Acceleration to Zero Coalition, which is also, I can say, it's quite powerful because it's ultimately exchange of knowledge and policy ambition alignment. And I can also mention a very important collaborative effort by Breakthrough Agenda, which is also kind of accelerating this development and deployment of all these clean technologies, particularly in high emitting sector. So I would say that all these multilateral finance institutions and these discussions, it definitely offers a buffer, and that would help this resilience and ambitious policy design, both in the market signal as well as international cooperation.
Okay, thank you very much. Who wants to add something to that? Kongomtua, from your perspective, and maybe also thinking about the local level, how do we ensure more resilience there?
Yeah, I completely agree with Sunita's mention regarding the resilience for binding policy and regulations. So to take an example from Indonesia, so we have national or city level government. Right? City level government is that if we want them to electrify, let's say, their public buses, they always say, is there an umbrella policy on this from the national government? Why do we have to do this? There is no binding, there is no obligations for me to do this. So in short, what they are looking for is the higher binding policy or regulations, which is currently there is one, but it's kind of like a vague. It's the interpretations of the Paris Agreement. Then it's translated into national policy, but it doesn't state the target emission, for example. It doesn't regulate, or it doesn't mention anything about the institutionalizations of this agenda. So what I want to say is that the national government needs
Oops. I think we've lost him. Oh dear. All right, he's probably going to come back. Sky, let me come to you. I mean, in some ways, China, I guess, is unusual in the way it does its planning and 5-year plans, and so you have the long-term certainty. But when Chinese companies operate in the international market, obviously you do have to deal with these uncertainties and changes. How do you feel that can be dealt with, maybe also in terms of international collaboration?
Okay, thank you. Yes, I do. I agree with you. I think the government certainty about the switch to the EVs is very important to the company to have strong ambition and belief to make the switch as well. So I think China has done this, continually, like you said, and but it's true that Chinese company has going other countries to like sell their product and make manufacturing factories. So I think, but I want to return to very like a basic point about this and I think let's be simple on this, because in my mind, I believe things will not work until it works economically. So I mean, I think the most important thing we want to do is to promote the car makers to make good enough EVs and to increase the customers' interest and awareness of EVs. So because no matter how the policy changing, it's hard to let people to buy what they dislike and don't believe. So I think it's important to have the good product and the people love it. So like the polling we just have, I think a lot of questions are related to the product qualities and the readiness of the EVs. So I think I'm reading the Elon Musk story, these days. So I'm thinking about what Elon Musk said. As long as the product is good enough, he said, the people will buy it. So I think the policymakers or our stakeholders should ask ourselves why some car makers are not contributing themselves fully into making EVs nowadays. I think maybe mostly because to some companies it's still not very profitable, and some maybe because the government ambitions is more blurred nowadays than 3 years or 2 years ago. So and why the customers still don't like EVs. So I think the policies should nowadays, especially I think somewhere the policies maybe should, instead of ask but assist the companies, and instead of punish but problem solving the companies, and instead of only setting the high target, I think the policy or government should focus on how to realize the goals step by step. And in this way, I think the international agencies should, like what we are doing today, encourage and support more policy and experience sharing across countries, and to let people be together and discuss. I think it's the best way to come out with the best ideas and the best practice. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Pier Paolo, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, I think the transition will not work at scale if it's not just an environmental success, but also a socio-economic success, and in diverse geographies. It's not gonna work, for example, if in some countries transitioning to EVs means entirely losing the automotive industry and lots of jobs. So I think we're facing a transition that is like it's a game changer for many aspects. This is, by the way, not just related with EVs, but it's also related with other parts of the renewable energies. Renewable energies are becoming more competitive, or became already more competitive. So now they also enter into the space of economic advantages or disadvantages. And so ultimately this means that the set of policies that we're going to need to accompany the transition are very are very holistic. Okay, they are not just environment policy, they are industrial policy, they are social policies. There's a mix of different actions that needs to be taken if we want to avoid the rollbacks. The rollbacks, to me, are a representation of like difficulties that we're facing in the transition. And so the answer to that is a holistic approach to economy-wide approach to how to handle the transition, not just to e-mobility, but also towards greater shares of renewable energies. I think there's a lot that the international community can do. We're talking about a very complex set of tools. And so, of course, cooperation is part of that. Also, sharing lessons learned on what a country managed to do to actually avoid some of the risks, and in order to inform actions by other countries. There's a lot of work to do on well, we talked about this, supply chain diversification, and in a way that is negotiated, is open to discussion, and takes into account different points of view. There are aspects related with employment, justice, social justice, not just within countries, but also across countries. So I think there's plenty of work, and especially for an organization like IRENA, and that by having your broad membership internationally, you can really be instrumental to help everyone to achieve progress.
Thank you very much. A bit of a challenge, but yes. All right, I want to sort of focus on audience participation for the next 15 minutes. So first of all, we're going to have one more poll. Jinlei, can you please start that? Right, this is on EV range. We just wanted to see what people here think is the kind of drive range they think is necessary for daily commuting in cities, which, you know, rightly or wrongly, is actually what most people seem to be using their cars for. And hence there's always this discussion, well, is range anxiety really an important thing? Because most of the time in city, well, there are two aspects. It makes EVs certainly very suitable because the range anxiety isn't an issue, but it also means it's very easy in many cases to switch to other transport options, be it bicycles or public transport or even walking. Okay, so would you like to pick which you think is the needed range, or what you would feel comfortable with for an EV? Single choice? Okay. Jinlei, shall we have the answers? Okay, so most people think 150 kilometers is enough, or 300, which is certainly what we see with most of the cheaper vehicles on the market now. I'm just thinking some of the small vehicles you get here in Europe, the smaller, newer ones, like say a Citroen C3 will do 350 kilometers, I think. Dacia Spring, which is one of the cheapest, will do a bit less, but certainly would be fine. But of course, the other thing we're seeing, I mean, I'm just amazed by some of the fast developments we see in the battery market. So, I mean, it seems to me that we will very soon see not just the very expensive EVs, but also some of the cheaper EVs with the higher range and faster charging. Okay, I want to pick the one question on affordability. You know, I mean, with EVs, we're talking in many cases either purchase of new vehicles or maybe, you know, vehicles that are just a few years old, but still quite expensive, really. But the situation, the reality about many people, I mean, the question here was about South Asia, but I think it applies much more widely certainly in the developing world, but to some extent also in the developed world. It's not as if everyone here can afford or can easily buy a new car. So people will have to spend many years savings, often to buy quite an old used car in reality. But the point here being made is that ICEs have decades of proven technology with safety and reliability, and EVs are seen as a novel technology. So if you're struggling with affordability anyway, it's maybe not the risk you want to take. So what do you think are some of the options? I mean, be it for new vehicles and what manufacturers can offer, or maybe also for used vehicles. Sky, do you have any thoughts on that one?
Well, I think this is the question I have discussed with a lot of experts in these 2 years, because maybe I'm thinking about what is happening in China and also in Europe. I think there is some country that's not rich enough to afford the new EVs in Europe. I think I forgot which country it is. And they are importing the used EVs from the other countries inside the EU. So to make their transformation to electric vehicles more affordable. And I'm thinking about just at that time why they don't buy Chinese import more Chinese cars that is much more cheaper and much more affordable at that time. So but I do think is like a problem the government struggling right now, because they just like Professor Perpolo just said, on one side the government want to make this transformation as quick as possible to meet their climate change goals, but on the other side they also care about their economy, their industry, the people's jobs. So this is really the questions, the biggest question I think we are facing around the world. The unbalanced and the struggling for the transformation to renewable energies, and the economy and the industries safety and de-risk, we say it. So I think in my point, as maybe in my own perspective, I welcome that we have more cooperation in no matter not only in the policy like making field, but also in the treatment, in the trade, in the economy field, in the industry field. Like we can have more like a free trade and cooperation to each other to get rid of all the geopolitical concern in this climate change transformation. So yeah, this is my answer.
Thank you. Pierpaolo, any thoughts on this?
Well, I think the diversification of the products that Ute, you referred to when talking about smaller EVs and cheaper EVs is part of the solution. I think we cannot, I mean, there's a clear orientation in the case of the European market in particular on deploying EVs on vehicles that cost more, and because there are larger margins and there's a greater, when you begin, like in general in the automotive sector, to roll out new technologies, typically this has been starting from the premium segments, and then it has been trickling down towards the rest of the fleet, and then new technologies come for the premium segment, and it keeps going like that. And And I think with EVs, we have seen the phase where the premium segment has been taking a first wave. And now if we want to scale, and by the way, the European regulatory framework evolved exactly at the end of last year and beginning of this year. So we are now seeing an increased diversification, and I think we'll see more in 5 years, in 2030, to go towards more affordable vehicles, given the current regulatory framework. So we need that. And I think in the same context, China has been achieving more in that sense, has been rolling out a lot more smaller EVs in the smaller segment, even though China is also targeting the premium segment. So globally, I think we will need to see more of this transition towards smaller EVs. By the way, there are also road safety advantages to avoid moving towards elephants on the road and towards smaller EVs, also road space allocation. So these are all part of the solution. There is also second-hand vehicle trade that you mentioned that is a relevant part. I understand, for example, that China will be probably evolving from being primarily, let's say, an internal market for second-hand vehicles towards an net exporter of second-hand vehicles. Already there are signs of this, for example, in Central Asia, in my understanding, and this will include EVs. So this would be a big change compared to historical developments, and it may help popularize cheaper EVs globally. It will come also with geopolitical influence aspects. So in any case, I think we're moving collectively towards a reality where there's going to be a more diverse offer and therefore also a more affordable one. I think this is positive, and I think we will need policy steering to go more in that direction and to accelerate in that direction for reasons based on equity, because otherwise we may risk to see the speed of that kind of development being slower than what it would be without policy.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of almost reminds me of the early days of solar PV. I mean, not in terms of what was available on the market, but, obviously there were government subsidies, but because, I mean, I'm thinking solar rooftop PV, but in the end, it was, of course, the better off people who could afford it, because you still would have to purchase the panels. And yes, I mean, maybe in the early days, it was a policy that wasn't very equitable in terms of that. It benefited the better off sections of society. But then, policies came in where local authorities got involved and installed on social housing, and people benefited through their bills. So, I mean, sometimes it just takes time as well to come up with a policy framework that is more equitable. I remember last year there was in France, there was a policy where, especially it sort of coincided with, I think, the Citroën C3 electric coming onto the market, and the government had a new subsidy scheme, which was kind of, I think, a monthly lease scheme for that vehicle. And I think it sort of went, was oversubscribed very quickly. So these things can work. And it was specifically for low-income households only. Sky, did you want to add something to that?
Yes, thank you. I want to add some words to it. I'm just thinking about the polling we just have. I think polling is interesting because it's asked what range do you need to travel in cities, and most people said it's 150 is enough. I think it's true, but we are considering the cheap EVs, but nowadays, if the EVs, the pure EVs are cheaper, usually means to some extent it can drive shorter, less range. But if you're considering the poor people, they can only have maybe one vehicles for themselves. So if they only have one cheap EVs that have a shorter range, what if they need to travel intercities or long distance? Maybe they need two vehicles, or maybe they need rent to another vehicles when they want to do this. So this means actual cost for their daily life. So this is the concern that we are talking about, that the pure battery EVs to poor communities. This is the problem they're saving. But I think this is also go back to what I'm sharing minutes ago. This is also the quality, you know, the product, how good is the product is, you know, because the batteries technologies or the charging technologies is not good enough right now to, you know, to have you know, long range but smaller batteries or cheaper vehicles, and cannot have, you know, really the charging speed as the refilling the oils, the gases. So I believe, you know, maybe 5 years later or 10 years later, as the technology become more advanced, the problem can be solved. You know, the cars with long the long range can be cheaper, and the charging process can be more like convenient and faster. Yeah, I think so. The technology is also, again, the solution.
Absolutely, yes. Pierpaolo, did you have an additional point there?
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on your example on the social leasing. I mean, generally speaking, I think this is framing a condition where there's a bit of a tension between technology policies and equity aspects. Technology policies are meant to accelerate technological development, deployment. So they need to create market scale, and generally this happens when technologies that have higher upfront costs. Here is clearly the case, and equity requires these technologies to be available for everyone. And so there is a phase, there's an initial phase in, and then there is a market diffusion. The social leasing in France is nothing else than a policy that tries to democratize this kind of EV offer, stimulating demand beyond the premium markets into the smaller, cheaper vehicle segments. So supporting the industrial transition towards offering a wider spectrum of vehicles on the market. It's also interesting to know that these could become something that ends up being paired with what is called social climate fund in the context of the EU, which is essentially, let's say, allocation of money made available by the use of carbon pricing in transport and buildings, and in order to give governments a budget to then help to deploy policies that have add the redistributional element to an industrial development element when it comes to the transition towards EVs. And so I expect the social leasing to be more widely used, and maybe in different forms, as soon as there is going to be this budgetary availability, additional budgetary availability in Europe from the Social Climate Fund. So that's interesting. This should strengthen market diversification towards smaller, more affordable EVs in the context of the EU.
Yeah, obviously it's not something every government can do. Sunita, from your example, two or three wheelers, I mean, how do you see the affordability issue? And also the issue, I think, one point of this question was also, well, people, I think, maybe feel more confident with the technology that's been around for a long time, and if they have to spend so much of their savings. And I guess that applies to cars as well as two or three wheelers.
Yeah, absolutely. As far as India is concerned, India is the largest manufacturer of two-wheelers across the regions. So it's a huge opportunity if we have like a lot of models available in the country as EV models. So which will help, it's like a seamless transition for the consumer themselves. So they don't mind if it is exactly the same energy efficiency as the current model that they are using. They don't mind shifting to the the EV models, provided a lot of manufacturers are coming up. So it's a huge opportunity for EV production as well. as well as the export ambitions if the manufacturers, if at all, are having. But as far as three-wheelers are concerned, the interesting story from India is that that was it's a commercial segment, but less of private vehicles in the three-wheeler segment. But the regulatory role which has helped its transition is almost nil. But we can see that people have shifted using the combustion three-wheelers to electric three-wheelers just because they have like easier transition and the drivers themselves found it easier. So if there are enough models and if the manufacturers come forward for that, it won't be a difficult transition.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, the point Sky made, if there is actually models where people, well, there's the affordability, but also something where people say, oh, this is actually better. Of course, they will go for it. Going on to a final point from you on this whole issue.
Yes, sorry, I was kicked out of the stream due to my internet issue previously. Yes, I was following the conversations regarding the affordability of the EV in general. So in my opinion, there are two sides of this, right? So there is demand side and also there is supply side. So, and we as a stakeholders, we need to help the government to create both sides. So from the demand side, it could be in the form of, for example, low emission zone that gives incentives to EV, and also, for example, parking strategy, which also gives incentives to EV. And from the supply side, it could be in the form of emission standard or sales mandate for the manufacturers to produce the EV. Which, well, in the first place, the government also needs to intervene to give incentives for them to produce more EV to the market, which then drive the EV price to a lower price, which creates that affordability. So I guess in my perspective, the first principle is to create these comprehensive policies from the demand side and also supply side.
Okay, thank you. Pier Paolo, did you have another point?
I just want to warn, I mean, incentives are good, but they need to be funded. So there must be also a plan on how to raise the money to afford the incentives. And production subsidies are not allowed in the context of international free trade. So if you want to respect international trade rule, you better adopt demand side. So you stimulate demand in order for production to materialize rather than stimulating production. Because if you stimulate production, although I understand, you end up like operating in a way that will be challenged by other countries in the context of the World Trade Organization. Now, there are global trade issues, but I do think that makes quite a bit of sense. So I would rather encourage the demand side incentives, maybe qualified, maybe with specific non-discriminatory criteria, but well, just a small thought on this, because I think we need to be a little bit careful.
Okay, thank you. We're actually out of time. It's almost 11, well, my time. Thank you very much to our four panelists. That was a really interesting discussion and very diverse perspectives from different places and good examples, I think, of how things can be done. I mean, I actually feel quite optimistic thinking about, where we were with EVs, I don't know, even 5 years ago, in terms of the range of vehicles that are available, the advances we're doing in batteries, the way the prices are coming down. I mean, of course, there are challenges, and unfortunately, we didn't have time to pick up some of the points people have made here. I mean, infrastructure, of course, charging stations, a lot will still need to be done there. But, I mean, the number of charging stations you see even in cities now has also grown. So it was very interesting for us at IRENA to work on this report and really thinking about how it links to renewables-based energy transition. And I hope we can continue working in this area. I'd like to again thank Jinlei and the team for putting together the talk and the report. And I would encourage everyone in the audience to look at the report. It's on our website. And, you know, we try to not just obviously focus on cars. We specifically picked up the 2-3-wheelers because it's very important to many of our member states, but we're also looking at heavy transport, at public transport, just for people to remember that, yeah, it's not just a car issue. So please have a look, and happy to have any feedback as well on the report. So thank you very much, and thanks again to the panel. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.